In the town of Bridgeton, in the state of Maine, the painter David, his wife Stephanie, and their son named Billy seek shelter from a strong storm that causes various material destructions. While walking around their property, Billy notices damage to the boathouse caused by their neighbor Brent's tree. While investigating the damage, the family sees a strange mist hovering over the lake in front of them, apparently coming from the mountain nearby. However, they didn't pay much attention to it and continued on. David decides to talk to his neighbor to exchange insurance information, aiming to cover the necessary repairs to the boathouse. While talking to Brent, he learns that Brent's car was destroyed by another tree during the storm, and as a friendly gesture, he decides to take Brent to town, with his son in the back seat. As they headed towards the city, they crossed paths with some suspicious military vehicles. After the intense storm the night before, many people went to the supermarket to buy supplies, including David, his son, and Brent. They began to hear the sound of sirens as military vehicles and police cars quickly passed by the store. An elderly man named Dan Miller rushed into the store with a bleeding nose, saying there was something in the fog and that it had taken a young person, but people thought he was crazy. At that moment, a fog slowly started to envelop the store, and suddenly an earthquake occurred, leaving everyone in a state of panic. Despite this, people hesitated to leave the store, but one woman desperately wanted to see her daughters, as she had left them alone, trusting the eldest and 8-year-old to take care of the youngest. She was very worried because she knew that the eldest sometimes neglects her sister. In the face of company refusal, she decides to confront the fog alone, disappearing from everyone's sight in an attempt to calm the situation. Some groups are forming, trying to reminisce about more peaceful times. Looking for blankets for her son, David received guidance from the store manager, Ollie Weeks, to find them at the landing dock. As he enters the dock through the back door, he encounters a malfunctioning emergency generator emitting a lot of smoke, so he decides to turn it off. Suddenly, David hears a strange noise coming from behind the garage door as if something is pressing against it. Upon returning inside to report the noise to a group of local men, they don't believe him but decide to open the door to fix the generator. This triggers a debate between David and the locals, with him expressing concerns about safety outside, which annoys one of them, who accuses him of underestimating them and thinking they're fools. Norm, the young man who worked packing products, decides to open the garage door. However, he is immediately surprised by a tentacled creature that grabs him by the leg. David and Ollie do their best to free him from the monster, but are unsuccessful. The others manage only to temporarily drive the creature away, cutting one of its tentacles with an axe before closing the door again. During a discussion about whether or not to share the truth with the others in the store, they realize that the security of the place is not as guaranteed as they imagined. Even after reporting the incident to the customers, they refuse to believe, treating the situation as a tasteless joke. However, their opinions change after being presented with tangible evidence in the form of the severed tentacle. After the store owner confirms that there was a threat on the premises, David and Ollie instructed the customers to protect the front windows of the store. A woman named Carmody, who is a fanatical religious believer, begins to preach about an imminent Armageddon and how this would be the day of judgment from God, which ends up frightening the children. Irritated by what the woman said, Amanda Dunfrey, a teacher, intervenes and slaps Mrs. Carmody to stop her from continuing with her senseless speech. Disbelieving in the existence of monsters, a group of skeptics, led by Brent Norton, chooses to leave the store in the hope of finding help outside. David tries to convince Brent, which only makes him more irritated. A local resident volunteers to go in search of weapons, attempting to retrieve a shotgun from Ambrose's truck. To monitor his path, they decide to tie a rope around his waist. As the group advances through the fog, the rope is suddenly quickly pulled for a few moments before stopping. David begins to slowly retract the rope inch by inch. At a certain moment, bloodstains emerge from the other side of the rope, revealing only the lower part of the motorcyclist's body at its end. A sense of horror grips the store, with everyone shielding the children's eyes from the terrible event. Now that the evidence has been witnessed, people begin to take the threat seriously. In preparation for the night, some people install lights throughout the store in the hope that it will scare off the monsters. However, this ends up attracting the terrible giant flying insects, which repeatedly beat against the glass until finally breaking through and invading the store. Panic sets in and everyone flees from the creatures, but some efforts are futile. One of the wasp-like creatures flies directly towards the store clerk, Sally, injuring her neck. In the ensuing chaos, 2 people are killed by the insects and another is burned to death in an attempt to incinerate the creatures. The loss of Sally leaves a man named Wayne Jessup saddened, as he had just confessed his feelings for her minutes before. Mrs. Carmody accurately describes a biblical scene that mirrors this exact incident and, in the midst of the chaos, is miraculously spared by an insect, which leads her to preach with even more fervor and gain followers among the survivors. Meanwhile, the store manager, Ollie, saved Billy's life by shooting one of the creatures before it could attack him. The following morning, a small group led by David goes to the nearby pharmacy in search of medical supplies and other survivors who may have sought shelter there. Amanda and the others try to convince David about the risks associated with this idea and the fact that it could result in leaving his son without parents. However, he was convinced it would be safe enough to go to the pharmacy, mentioning how far the motorcyclist had gone before being fatally injured. Even Mrs. Carmody warned them against leaving, starting a monologue about her faith when she is hit in the head by a can. It is discovered that it was thrown by Irene Repler, a former teacher, who told her to shut up. As they traverse through the fog, they quickly reach the pharmacy, and finding it calm inside, they think they are safe. However, upon entering the pharmacy, they come across a nest of giant spiders, along with Brent's group of people, all dead. They are then attacked by the giant spiders, who kill 2 men using their webs to injure and capture their prey. In an attempt to retreat, Dan encounters another spider in front of the exit door, which he violently pierces using only a piece of wood. Fortunately, the rest of the group returns safely to the interior of the store. Mrs. Carmody, who had opposed the expedition, seizes this setback to expand her influence, offering protection against divine wrath to the new converts. Many believers begin to form prayer circles welcoming all newcomers. David recalls the last words of the deceased soldier in the pharmacy, which were, "I apologize," leading him to suspect that the military is somehow connected to this. In their search for the other soldiers who were locked in the store with them, they discover that 2 of them had taken their own lives, likely due to feelings of guilt. When confronted, the 3rd soldier, Jessup, reveals that a government project to explore other dimensions was underway at the base, and that scientists may have opened a passage to a dimension containing the creatures now invading the town. Upon learning this information, Mrs. Carmody's followers attack Jessup with knives and offer him as a sacrifice, also expelling him from the store, where he is immediately consumed by a huge creature resembling a praying mantis. After witnessing these traumatic scenes, Billy, who is David's son, begs his father to promise not to let the monsters take him. The next morning, David and his group, consisting of Amanda, her son Billy, Ollie, Bud, Irene Repler, and Dan Miller, prepare to leave the establishment in search of shelter away from the fanatical cult that has formed inside. While everyone is still asleep, they attempt to leave through the front door but are interrupted by Mrs. Carmody, who proclaims herself as God's vessel and preaches about the divine requirement of a blood sacrifice to appease, portraying God as a monster, and demands that Billy be handed over as the next sacrifice. During this commotion, David was prepared to confront her to protect his son, but before he could act, Ollie attacks Mrs. Carmody. He then threatens her traumatized followers, causing them to retreat and allowing the group to escape. Despite their efforts, he and 2 others are swallowed by the creatures while trying to reach David's van. Bud manages to run back into the store, but only David, Billy, Amanda, Dan, and Irene make it to the car. In an effort to grab Amanda's gun from the car hood, David narrowly escapes a monster attack but manages to grab the weapon, which he believed would be useful. They head towards David's house through the fog, where they find his wife, Stephanie, already dead and hanging in webs. Disappointed by what he saw, he decided to take them all away from the city. During the journey, they encounter several abandoned cars on the side of the road and come across a huge 6-legged creature. After driving for many hours, they end up running out of fuel, with no way out amidst the dense fog and the terrifying noises approaching. David takes Amanda's gun, insinuating with his gaze that it would be better to kill themselves than to face a terrible death. While counting the remaining bullets, he realizes they are 1 short. He then decides to spare the others from pain and be the only one to survive, taking on the responsibility of killing them. Just before shooting his son, Billy wakes up with a gun pointed at his head and a shot is fired. His wish not to be captured by the monsters comes true. For better or for worse, David continues to act, firing at the remaining 3 survivors with the few bullets he has left before leaving the vehicle, screaming in pain, hoping to be captured by the creatures. While waiting, suddenly the fog begins to dissipate, revealing the front of a United States Army armored vehicle that is committed to eliminating the creatures and restoring order. In one of the trucks, he spots the individuals from the store who were rescued after his departure, including the woman who had gone out to find her children. At that moment, David becomes aware that he took the lives of his own son and the other survivors in vain, and he screams in despair. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next videos.